Howdy all, grab yourselves a beer, it's time to talk Path of Exile. Now this is the second part of my early league guide to making currency in Path of Exile. The first part of this guide, which I'll link to below, it recognizes that in the first 48 hours of a new league provide a very unique and an underutilized opportunity to make a very large amount of currency. That is not something that continues, and that comes from selling maps that you get before everyone else gets to higher tiers. If you've got lots of them, you can then go and sell maps at extraordinarily high prices. But more so than that, it comes from selling rubbish gear very early on. The first video in this series looks at that first 48 hours and the unique opportunities that it provides. This is more my day 3 to 14 of a new league guide. So perhaps you've already used the first 2 days to make currency in accordance with the suggestions that I had there, or perhaps you've missed it. You've missed that opportunity, but you still want to make as much as you can, and you want to sort of make a plan for later on. This guide's going to look at 4 different things that you want to be doing. Firstly, you want to be personally looting at a fast pace. This can come from many sources. It can come from a general mapping. It can come from shallow delving, which is a strategy I'll get to in a sec. And it can come from equipping lots of magic find gear and chasing divination cards. The second option for creating wealth for yourself early in a league is crafting for profit with a low investment. So we're not talking about about stockpiling dozens, even hundreds of exalted orbs and repeatedly using the prefixes cannot be changed to create a mirror tier item here. We're talking about creating good gear, equipment that people are happy to use in tier 12, tier 13, tier 14 maps, and even further than that, even as they start pushing the Shaper, they start pushing the Red Elders hard mode, and they start sort of trying to work on getting their forever gear. The third option, or the third thing I want to point out is convenience, is monetizing in the sense not of real world money, but monetizing in-game, being someone that people come to for convenience. And the fourth is killing bosses. So on the first of these, personally looting items at a fast pace. Everything about this comes down to going fast. You'll notice here my league start character from the Betrayal League, who I've ended up being my league main. I had a lot of fun with him. He's a level 93 saboteur that specializes in arc traps and can clear maps pretty effectively. Can do some pretty difficult maps. Anyways, this character is not particularly fast. If you have a look at the gear I'm wearing, the only thing I've got that's increasing movement speed is this set of like perfectly serviceable boots. 30% increased movement speed, which is the second best that you can get without having shuttered fossils involved, and a Quicksilver Flask, which I've currently got a warding one because I'm about to run a map that has temporal chains on it. I also have a Quicksilver Flask of Adrenaline that I would also use in other situations. So speed is everything, and this character that I'm running as my main in the Betrayal League is not particularly fast. There's a lot of ways of stacking speed in the game. One of them is the Queen of the Forest body armor, which under ideal circumstances can give you as much as 75% increased movement speed on your body armor. There's various items like the aforementioned Quicksilver Flasks, that could be combined with various sources of onslaught, either from a flask or from anything else. The Haste Aura, the Val Haste Special Aura, all sorts of things like this that can juice up your movement speed. And if your goal is to exploit personally looting fast, you want to be doing that. Outside the narrow window very early on that I mentioned before, usually the first couple of days where red maps command insane prices, it's generally going to be more lucrative to run a tier 5 map very fast than it will be to run a tier 15 map slowly. Now, of course, there is the balance between the fun you're having and the success that you're encountering in game. You've just got to find your own balance here, and it's certainly the case for me that I find it so much more fun to run the higher tier maps and to run the deeper delve content, that I go ahead and run that, even though it definitely is much less lucrative than running the low level content easy at a supremely fast move speed. So optimal play involves moving at light speed through maps. So that when I say light speed, I mean Quicksilver of Adrenaline speed, with as many other stacking sources of move speed as you can get without sabotaging your build. You want to backtrack for alchemy orbs and better, and run a tight loot filter. You want to be backtracking only for good things. You don't want to be backtracking for crumbs like alteration orbs or jeweler's orbs, or for absolute shit like 3-link items, blue, red, green 3-link items. Nothing wrong with picking them up if they're in your way, but you will find in general that you'll go faster if you just remove them entirely from your loot filter, and you rely upon purchasing chromatic orbs from other players. Early on in the league, you want to be buying items that make your character go faster, and you want to be spending currency on this. See it as an investment. For instance, purchasing Queen of the Forest early. Queen of the Forest at the moment, and I'll bring up if you're not familiar with poe.ninja, the website, it is an absolutely brilliant resource. Path of Exile, poe.ninja maintains a listing of all of the unique items in the game and and the typical prices that they're being traded for. And you'll see that in the Betrayal League, at this very late in the league stage, Queen of the Forest Destiny Leather is only 2.2 Chaos Orbs is a typical price for a 1 to 4 link. A 5-link version goes for around 30, and a 6-link goes for 2.8 Exalted Orbs at the moment. However, very early in a league, this item, precisely because of the reasons I'm explaining at the moment, a lot of people will be willing to pay much, much more than that for it. Reason being, it makes them go faster, and even though they buy a 4-linked version of Queen of the Forest now for, let's say they buy it at 3 exalts early in the league, they know that it's only going to be worth 5 chaos later in the league. But if it speeds them up so much that it helps them to loot 7 more exalts than they otherwise would have, it was an absolutely brilliant investment with that 3 exalted orbs. So you want to be spending your early currency buying things that make you faster if you choose to go down the personally looting items route. I've already mentioned Queen of the Forest. A perfectly rolled Quicksilver Flask of Adrenaline is another good example, and you should not feel bad spending far, far more on such an item than you'll ever get in resale, because it will be worth it. Next point that I want to make is that early league demand for Orbs of Fusing is enormous. And you know that if you go to various vendors throughout the game, in the final Oriath area, in the final Oriath area, I believe from memory it is Lani that is the person involved. You can turn 4 Jeweler's Orbs into a Fusing Orb there. These will be taken from your stash if you don't have them handy. And you can sell any 6-socketed item that you loot for 7 Jeweler's Orbs. So that means that basically every one of those is 1.7 Orbs of Fusing. No matter how strict your loot filter is early on, you should make sure that you're showing 6-socket items early. Later, it's entirely reasonable to drop even items as valuable as 6 sockets entirely off your filter. But early on, you definitely want them. You want them there. The next point that I want to make is that unique items. Unique items are something that I loot way too many of, as you can see by looking at my my quad tabs here. There's all sorts of unique items that I've kept just on the basis of, oh, maybe one day I'll make another build in this league that wants this item, and I'll feel bad if I have to end up trading for it. Now, whilst that's the case, a lot of these are actually quite rare. Unique items drop in 4 broad rarity categories. There's tier 4 uniques, and I suspect that Brightbeak, the unique Warhammer, is in this category. These items drop a lot. Tier 3 items appear to be twice as rare as Tier 4s, which is still pretty common. And I suspect, and again, I can't verify this, it's actually very difficult to conduct any real experiments on actual item rarities, but I suspect that Tabula Rasa is a Tier 3 unique item. I suspect that Loctonial Caress is a Tier 3 unique item. These items are twice as rare as Tier 4s, which means that if you play a lot, you might pick up, say you play enough to pick up 28 Bright Beaks. In that time, you could expect to pick up 14 Tabula Rasas. Then there are Tier 2 uniques, which are twice as rare as the Tier 3s. An example of this, I believe, is the Coming Calamity, which is the Autobomber's Dream body armor. This armor can be quite expensive early on in the league, although by the time by the time you get a bit further in, it's very cheap. +2 to the socketed Herald gems, increased energy shield, so it's pretty bad as an energy shield piece of armor, but it's not totally worthless. But the key thing is that mana reservation of Heralds is always 45%, so it means that you can run a 6-link Herald in your chest piece. Your helmet can be a 4-linked Herald that is also further augmented by various Shaper or Elder mods, like Socketed Gems are supported by Immolate. And those two Heralds will only cost you 90% reservation, which is still a lot, but it's a lot less. You could be talking, they could be as much as 150% each with the amount of supports that you're putting on them. It's a very nice item, very, very narrow niche, and I suspect that it's a Tier 2 unique. Then you have your Tier 1 uniques, which I suspect to be 10 times rarer than the Tier 2s. Again, this is really difficult to test. These are items like Calm's Heart, Mjolnir, which is not particularly popular at the moment, Cosbury's Malice, a lot of the really build-defining uniques that are very seldom seen, as well as a few items that haven't stood the test of time well. Ming's Heart is an example of this. It was a very popular Chaos Resistance ring once, and nowadays it's not considered to be any good, but it does still seem to be very rare. In any case, Tier 1 unique items, generally early in the league, the supply of them will be tremendously below the demand. Tier 2 uniques will generally, if they're popular at all, there will be a situation where supply starts out miles lower than demand, but pretty quickly, once people start running maps fast, you get through so many maps that people will loot these, they will start selling them, and there'll be lots of them in the economy. And so, for that reason, unless the demand is extraordinarily high, like it is for, say, Bisco's Leash, which I suspect to be a Tier 2 rarity unique, unless that's the case, then these items will fall to be worth virtually nothing very quickly. In any case, the Tier 2 uniques that you loot, you want to be selling fast. You do not want to be holding on to them. Hold your Tier 1 items unless they're niche. So if you get a drop like Chevron's Wrappings or Calm's Heart, sometimes it's right to sell it. Sometimes, though, you don't actually want to sell it on day 3 or 4. You might get more on day 7 or 8 when there are more people who have the resources to buy it. Because that's a very important part of supply and demand. It's not demand that sets prices, it's the amount of people that both have the desire for the item and have the means to pay for it. And early on in a league, there are a lot of people that want Calm's Heart but can't afford it, whereas by day 7, a lot of those players, people who've set their mindset from the start of the league was, I'm going to get myself a Calm's Heart. That's going to be my character's forever chest. I'm going to wear it. I'm never going to change it again. A lot of those people will have a few Exalted Orbs behind them by day 7 of a league, and they'll be in a position to purchase a Calm's Heart off you. So your Tier 2 uniques sell straight away if they've got any value to them, and be willing to undercut the market a bit. Your Tier 1 uniques, consider selling, but consider holding them, and just watch the sort of trends. Again, PoE.Ninja which I'll just bring the I'll bring the site quickly back up. It actually has a trendline price, and if we have a look here, you'll see this is the Queen's Hunger, which is actually a unique item I wasn't even aware existed. Looks like it's got lots of skills related to minions, and you'll see here that it's generally trended mostly downwards. Obviously, there's ups and downs, but it's trended mostly downwards in price. These are in Chaos Orbs throughout the Betrayal League, and so it's one that you'd probably want to get rid of quickly. I actually suspect that this... Oh, sorry, I'm looking at the... I'm actually looking at the 6-link version of that at the moment. I might just go back to the base item because that's what matters. So let's take something different. Let's take Skyforth and just look at the trend line on that, because and I've picked up the wrong thing. Trend line is here, and you'll see here that it sort of started out quite low. This is a tier 1 rarity unique. It started out quite low. Then over a few days, there's a small number of people that really want this item in a league. And it took a few days for them to get enough resources to be able to afford it. And then we see that it's just steadily dropped as more and more people have looted Skyforth over time. And so yeah, that's an example. That's a good example. So just watch those trends. If it starts trending downward, then at that point I think it's time to get rid of it. The next point that I'll make is that you want to be using alchemy orbs on your maps, even if this requires you to drop tiers of maps that you're doing. Alchemy orbs typically add 20% pack size, 50% quantity, and if you've watched my video where I define the map juice factor, you'll see that this approximately doubles the entire loot that you get from the map. So as long as the average loot that you get from the roughly 500 mobs that you'll find in a white map is at least is at least a bit more than one alchemy orb, it's positive. You will actually get positive returns from alching a map. However, those 500 monsters you'll get in a in a typical map, and it's not exactly 500. It can be a bit more than that, but that 500, 520, whatever it is, that number of those monsters will typically drop much more than just one alchemy orb. You'll get a few fusings, a couple of fusings, a couple of 6 sockets. And you've also got the small chance of getting a big drop like an exalted orb or a bunch of smaller things that add up to a lot. So for that reason, it's generally better to run your maps alked, and that may necessitate dropping tiers. If it does, go ahead, drop those tiers, do the tier 5 maps fast rather than doing the tier 15 maps slow. But maps are not the only option, nor are they necessarily the best option. And I want to bring up the example of low-level delving here as an example of something that you can do that is very lucrative and that you can do fairly early in a league. Now, I have no guarantee that this is not going to be nerfed. It feels broken enough to be to justify a nerf. Now, you'll see here that I'm I'm a few hundred tiers down into the delve mines at the moment. But I'm just going to zoom back right up, all the way back up. And what we're going to do is look for lower depth zones, and when we're in a lower depth zone, we're going to look for long paths. And you'll see here, there's a fairly long path here between this azurite vault in the fungal caverns through to this smouldering grave in the magma fissures. So I'm going to path across to it, and I'll just blitz my way through these delves and demonstrate what it is that is involved in the low-level delving strategy. This is not the ideal character for this, but because it doesn't really matter, I'm in a zone where the monsters are level 69, which is equivalent to a tier 2 map. I'm using almost no sulfite, at least for an endgame character, and just running one tier 12 map that has Nico on it will get you enough to run, literally dozens of these delves. So I've completed the objective here. All I was interested in doing... Oh, I've actually got to kill a few monsters as well. Thought that it was just a case of hitting those things, but I've got to kill all these rowers. And there we go, we've just opened it up. Because my loot filter is so strict, I'm not actually seeing anything drop. Now I just got to path once more. And again, you'll need to do a bit of this pathing. The longer delves are important because they have the fractured walls in them, and there were some changes made at the beginning of the Betrayal League, which again, I don't know how accurate, how precisely this will remain the case in the Synthesis League, but at the moment, the vast majority of fossils that drop, and when you're doing shallow delving, you're doing it chasing fossils. The vast majority of fossils have been dropped behind fractured walls. Fractured walls will never spawn on a delve where the delve is the shortest possible length. And I'll demonstrate that as soon as these silly spiders let me be. It's one of the drawbacks to running delves is that you get no rest at all, which is actually, it's part of the reason they're fun, but it also means that there's no rest at all, no chance to de-stress. The delving is on a grid, so it may not be immediately apparent, but then you can see these biome walls. All of them form a grid, so there's this line here, top to bottom, this line left to right, and then there's lines like this that, you know, vertical line here, and what we've got here, that defines a grid. These sorts of lines that you'll see around, they define a grid. Each grid square contains either an encounter, like this azurite vault in these fungal caverns, or if it doesn't contain one of those, it will instead always have one fractured wall. So this next delve that we're going to do over to this smouldering grave has this square here. This will contain a fractured wall. This square here will contain a fractured wall. This square, another fractured wall. This square, another fractured wall. And this square. Checking our currency, not our currency, our supplies. 7 dynamite and 15 flares. We're good to go. So we'll go for this. Those fractured walls, and we'll have to actually be transported in there. Those fractured walls will almost always require going off the main path in order to find them. We're still in the first square, and the first one will be once we've transitioned into magma. So we're transitioning here into magma, and we'll try to go faster, but do pick up these nodes. This Forgotten Wealth node, okay, this one was rubbish, but usually they contain 2 or 3 alterations or better. Quite often they'll be much better than that. Here's another one, a Lost Wealth node. And there we go, that's a Chaos Orb. Nothing great, but certainly not complaining. But this side path here is likely to be where where it is, and I was wrong. You do get a bit of a feel for where it's likely that you'll get your fractured walls, but you won't always be right. And down here, lost loot is not worth looting. You'll get a sense for what's worth looting and what isn't over time. And again, we still haven't found our first fractured wall. I'm being forced to use my flares a bit more than I'd like. I'm still in the first square, and this here is the fractured wall. And I've got a flare cache, which is always a really nice thing to get when you're doing these long delves. Here we've got 2 hidden riches, and you'll see loot explosions from these things. You're not going to get rich off these, but they will add up. As far as I can tell, there's 3 tiers of currency dropping ones. They're behind fractured walls. There's a hidden riches like this, which is the 2nd tier. There's a hidden wealth, which is weaker, and there's a hidden opulence, which always contains an annulment, divine, or exalted orb. Hidden opulence is quite a rare node, but you will get some of them. And we'll just keep pushing through. There's nothing else in this square on the map. So we're going to go into the next square of this delve soon, and we're in the next square now, so we're going to start looking downside paths again. And this will be it here, I believe. No, I'm wrong. once more, you will generally get a bit of a feel for where they are, but you won't always be right. So we're going to keep checking every side passage, and I believe it'll be this one. And here we are. So I'll put down a dynamite to blow up this wall. As I said, the fossils are mostly behind the dynamite, but Hidden Wealth, this is the lower tier of Hidden Riches, but still good. We're still in the same zone, so we don't actually need to check down these side passages. One of the reasons we do this in low tier zones, you'll notice that some of those bats fire a horrendous sonic attack at you. That is pretty trivial in low tier zones, but if you're in higher tier ones, it will absolutely tear you to shreds if you stand in it. It's actually quite difficult to see, and so I've certainly died a lot of times to being careless around that. Now I've realised at this point that I still haven't found the side thing for this zone, which means it should be very close, and if it's not, then I've probably missed it. I'm not going to do a full in the dark search for it, because that would just be riskier than the opportunity is actually worth. Ah, here it is. Here's our third dynamited wall. Now we still haven't found any of the things that we're really here for, which is the fossil nodes, and that's not rare. The fossil nodes aren't in every single run that you do. When you get them, you'll often get as many as 4, 5, or as 4 or even 5 sometimes of the various fossils that can drop in that biome. So I'm currently in a magma zone. The magma zone can drop enchanted and pristine fossils, which are the good ones, and can also drop a couple of less impressive ones. It can drop scorched, and I think there's something else as well. So we're going to keep running. I'm not bothering with that Forgotten Armor node. I did see it, but it's just not worth it's just not worth the time bothering with it. You'll notice I'm getting a very large number of mid-tier currency items throughout this. There's a Hidden Wealth. And those currency items will add up, but they will not be as much as the bigger hits that you get sometimes when you get a fossil node. That, you know, can suddenly give you 15 to 20 Chaos Orbs worth of fossils. If you were to get, say, 3 enchanted fossils and one scorched, that can be anywhere from, depending on the market prices that day, that could be 10 Chaos, that could be 21. And these things sell too. So we'll keep pushing through here, and again, because it's... although these monsters have powerful on-death effects, because I'm running in such a low-tier zone, I can largely ignore it. They're just not quite dangerous enough for me to care about all of the attacks that they do. It is very important, however, that you have maximum darkness resist, so you will not be able to do this without 75% darkness resist for that depth. Which again is another incentive to do it shallowly, so sticking to monster level 68 or so. You won't need to do as much farming of Azurite in order to get the necessary darkness resistance. And that's the end of this delve. I believe I stuffed up and I missed one of the five items that was in there. So one of the 5 potential fractured walls that I could have broken down. So that just gives you a sense that there was even more loot than we got, but that's my own fault. I didn't see it, and you'll often miss one. And here we go. Here's all of the loot that would have dropped from the trash mobs along the way. Quite a lot of it. But that's enough for delving. You can do that very early in the league. Whilst I'm running this with a character that's capable of clearing tier 15 maps, you certainly don't need to be. You can be doing this with a low level character. In addition, if you're doing it with a lower level character, you will be getting some meaningful experience from it as well. The things you want to pick up, you want to be targeting the shallow delves that are longer and picking up the fossils that are hidden behind fractured walls. You want to be targeting the currency nodes, and you want to be targeting jewelry nodes. I'll just look for one of those as an example. Jewelry nodes like this in monster levels 68 and higher. The reason for that is that they have nodes called Astral Jewelry and Eldritch Jewelry. An Astral Jewelry node will give you a random Shaper or Elder ring or belt or amulet, and an Eldritch one will be the same, except it will be an Elder influenced item. There is a recipe where if you turn in to a vendor a full set, so that's something that could go in every inventory slot. Typically it's a two-handed weapon, a helmet, a chest, gloves and boot, belt, 2 rings and an amulet. If you turn in all of those items to a vendor and all of them are Shaper or all of them are Elder, then you will receive 2 exalted shards if they're identified and 4 exalted shards if they are not identified. Generally it's best with the low item level ones to turn them in as unidentified items. 4 exalted shards is a fifth of an exalted orb. That certainly adds up over time. You want to be targeting dense, prismatic, enchanted, and pristine fossils as League ages, but early on, pretty much all of them are good. And you want to be selling these fossils in bulk. If you can get and gather enough of them that it's worth selling for an exalted orb, that's the sort of quantity you want, because serious crafters will be buying exalt quantities. In fact, you can ask for a premium if you're selling lots of them. So where someone might be willing to pay, might be paying 5 chaos for 1 prismatic fossil, you may very well be able to sell them 40 prismatic fossils for 240 chaos instead, or the equivalent in exalts. Your second option that you can target, so that's touching delves as an alternative to maps. A second option that you can target early on is Divination Cards. And Divination Cards, specifically for unique items that are build-defining uniques, and as such are undersupplied early in the game, early in a league. So these will be bottlenecks for people that want to transition into a specific build, but that feel like they can't quite get there yet. Some of these will be unique items, and also as well as unique items, it can be stepping stone items like 6-link, the various 6-link armor divination cards. I'll let you research this further yourself, but Windripper is a very popular unique item to farm through divination cards early on. And while we're talking about farming items yourself, it's impossible to talk about this without going into Magic Find. Magic Find on items that you can wear yourself is an overpowered stat. More specifically, increased item quantity is a broken stat. When I say broken, I'm not saying it doesn't work, I'm saying it is too good to be fair in the current state of the game. Increased item quantity on items multiplies all currency drops and multiplies all divination card drops, as well as multiplying all of the typical trash loot that you get on the ground. So if you've got 30% magic find from items, this means that in the time it would take another player to find, or at least, sorry, if another player runs enough content that they would have looted 50 Chaos Orbs, in that same time, from that same content, you would have looted 65. If that player would have looted 20 of the Nurse Divination card, you would instead have looted 26. If that player would have looted 30 Exalted Orbs, you would have looted 39. All because you have increased item quantity. Another way to think of it is if you've watched my video on the juice factor of a map, increased item quantity on your character, so on in terms of items that you've got on your character, boosts the juice factor of a map considerably. If you can get 40%, if you can get 30% increased item quantity on your character, that will mean that you get the rewards for running, if you run a white map, so a map that's got no modifiers on it at all, like, let's just grab something out from my stash tab. this perfectly ordinary Dark Forest map here, if you were to run that, you would get the same rewards that another player would get for running a transmuted and augmented Dark Forest. If you were to run a 6 mod rare map, you would get the rewards that that someone else running an 8 mod rare map would get, with about 32% magic find. So this is an enormous boost to the amount of loot that you've got coming in. And as a result, if you can fit increased item quantity on your gear without sacrificing move speed, do so. And this might require decreasing the tier of map that you're running. So you might go from wearing really good gloves that that make your character much more powerful. You might downgrade them to a set of gloves unique gloves that's got magic find on it. Maybe instead of wearing a powerful Stygian belt, you might change to the temple belt, the string of servitude that has that's always corrupted and has triple effect of implicit mods, and that can have as much as 15% increased item quantity. This will be a truly enormous boost to your to the amount that you loot for every piece of magic find gear that you can fit. One very important factor though is that increased item quantity does not amplify your map drops. So keep that in mind, as it will have and it also does not amplify the loot that is dropped by various breakables throughout the map. It is only the loot that you get from monsters, but that is the majority of what you will loot. Anyways, I'm going to conclude the section on personally looting things yourself there. A quick recap. Speed is your god, speed is your lord, speed is your savior. You want to be moving fast. You do not want to be moving at the speed that my character is moving on your screen now. You want to be going fast. This is faster, but you can go much faster than this too. And if you can go through a map at light speed, barely slowing down ever to attack, that's the way you want to be. Minimal backtracking, and you want to consider delving, but also be aware that that may get nerfed in the future, because although it didn't seem it from the run that I did before, delving is just overpowered as far as loot goes at the moment. The second option for making currency early on is by exploiting people's willingness to pay for convenience. Now, one thing I found particularly lucrative in this league has been selling complete sets of maps. So you have a look here at my tier 12 maps. You can see that I can sell someone, in fact I've got at least 5 of every map. So if someone wants a complete set of tier 12s to get their atlas going, I can sell them one of everything. And what I was doing early on was I was making transactions easy. I would list my maps at a little bit above the fair price. So early in the league, when maps have certainly fallen off in price now. Currently, I think a tier 11 map is hard to sell even at 1.5 chaos. But at the start of the league, 3 chaos was the fair price for every tier 11 map, and 4 chaos was a fair price for every tier 12. I listed all my tier 12s at 5 chaos, and whenever someone came to me, they'd send me a message, "Hey, I want to buy your Arsenal map." I would then just send back a request, "Hey, do you need any more tier 12s while you're at it?" If not, that's fine, I'd just sell them the Arsenal and move on. But quite often, that person wouldn't just buy the one map from me. They'd be like, "Okay, you know what? I need Arsenal, I need Castle Ruins, I need Ivory Temple, and I need Necropolis. Can you give me them all for..." And maybe they'll offer 19 chaos. And I'll be like, "Yep, sure." You'll have a massive map surplus early in the league if you had a bit of a head start. If you got into high tier maps early on, especially if you've gotten into deep delving. Now, you probably haven't gotten into deep delving. Most people haven't. By day 3 to 14 of a league, they probably aren't yet at the point that they're doing monster level 77, much less 83 delves. But if you're anywhere close to that, you will just be swimming in maps, and you can sell complete sets of to people. And one thing I do is I jump into the trade channel Trade159, which, if you're not familiar with it, just in the client, just type /trade159, and you'll then be transferred into a trade channel that is dominated by people who are looking to trade maps for maps or their currency for your maps. And just say, hey, selling a complete set of tier 12 maps. And early in the league, you might say 40 chaos. Later in the league, that might fall to only be 20 chaos. Sell them at a little bit over fair price, and you'll get lots of takers. This is also it is perfectly rational from a buyer's perspective to overpay a little. And if you're joining the league late and you're pretty good at making currency, you should absolutely consider doing this to turbocharge your Atlas progress. The same idea of selling things in bulk applies to fossils, which I've already mentioned in the personally looting section. You want to be the person that has a reputation that you've got 20 of a fossil. If you're selling one of it, you've got 20 of it. If someone's coming to you, you'll sell them the 20, you'll charge more, but people are quite happy to pay for convenience if they're doing serious crafting. The third section that I've got for getting currency in the early phase of a league is crafting. Now, the first thing I want to point out is a very important warning. When you're crafting stuff for yourself, be frugal. And what I mean here is, don't mind so much about the pennies. You know, if you've got an absolutely rubbish set of gloves and you're like, I'm just going to pick up something off the ground and I'm going to transmute it, and that's all I'm going to be willing to spend, or I'm going to use one of these garbage tier essences on it, that essences that I still happen to have. Don't be stingy with the pennies, but when it comes to the big currencies, this is your exalted orbs, your annulment orbs, your divine orbs, and gee, since I bought my headhunter, this tab certainly looks empty. But when you're using those big currencies, be extremely, extremely tight with them. My rule of thumb is never to use an exalted orb to add a random additional mod to an item that I'm crafting for personal use. There's exceptions, but don't worry about them for now. Just treat it as a hard rule and save your exalted orbs for trading and for deterministic self-crafts. So ones where there's no randomness, you know exactly what you're going to get. So for instance, if you wanted to add the top tier of increased physical damage onto an item. Slamming, i.e. using an exalt to add a random mod to an item, only do this after you've run a cost-benefit analysis that has involved looking up the data mined probabilities to get the mods that you want. These can be pretty hard to find online. Someone has put together a crafting simulator recently that I've not been able to get working myself at my end. But generally speaking, the information is somewhat available online. You can find, if you do a search for PoE mod weightings, you'll find a lot of this information, but it does change, and it seems to be fairly difficult to find anywhere that consistently lists it. The other thing that I'll add is that unless you want something incredibly narrow, like something that is for your specific niche hipster build, it is usually cheaper to buy what you want than it is to craft it yourself. The reason for this is that there's people that do my crafting for profit approach, which is start with an item that has the potential to become good in lots of different ways, and start crafting, see what happens, and then finish it off. It is simply cheaper for these people to make a powerful item for your build than it is for you to just specifically target your build with crafting. Another thing is that your time is valuable, and where I was saying earlier, be frugal when it comes to spending exalted orbs, divine orbs, and annulment orbs, and also things like Essence of Horror, Essence of Insanity, Glyphic Fossil, and especially things like Hollow Fossils, Bloodstained Fossils, and the like. If you're just using cheap crafting mods like Scorched Fossils or Frigid Fossils, in that case, don't bother spending ages researching the odds. Just do a few tries, see if you can get what you want. It's when you realize that each attempt is going to start costing you a fair bit, like 20 Chaos Orbs or more. At that point, you should do your serious research. Another thing is, if an item is available on the market for under 20 chaos, just buy it. And if crafting it would use expensive materials like glyphic fossils or hollow fossils, set your just buy it to threshold much higher. I typically say 5 exalts. So as an example of that, I'm using a pretty powerful but not uber set of gloves here that have, if we just bring up the detailed modifiers, you'll see that they've got the mod socketed gems are supported by level 18 trap, and skills which throw traps throw an additional trap. And they also simultaneously have socketed spells have 70% to critical strike multiplier. This is a powerful combination of mods, and crafting that yourself would be very expensive. As a result, when I saw that come up for 5 exalts, I was like, yep, I'm just going to take it. Now, if you accidentally craft something for yourself that is very good, but that is not what you want, sell it. Buy a new base and start over. This is really critical. Those shaped gloves that I've got, that I'm using on my character, I have no idea what the mindset was of the person that was crafting them, because, as I said, I picked them up off someone else. They may well have been using Chaos Orbs and just spamming these gloves, hoping to hit something that was perfect for their Elemental Overload character, who might use traps but has no benefit at all from the trap multiplier. Sorry, from the crit multi on these gloves. And that player might have been thinking at first, oh gee, that's not what I want. That crit multi mod is completely useless to me because I have Elemental Overload. Now, I'm not saying this is definitely what was happening, but it's possible. Had that been the case, that player absolutely should not have rolled over them, because they had a good set of gloves, one that would sell to the right person, i.e. someone like myself that's playing a crit-based trap build, who will pay 5 exalts for them. So yeah, never craft over something that is legitimately good but not what you want, unless the base is so expensive that you just can't afford to replace it. Next up, and related, don't 6-link items yourself unless they're basically irreplaceable. If you're in doubt, 6-link an overquality lore weave, so a 28% quality lore weave if you can get one, but 20% will do, and use that, because lore weave always has resale value and is one of the strongest items in the game. So you can just use that and then buy your forever armor directly. Now that assumes that lore weave is something that works with your build. Generally, the reason I say not to 6-link items yourself for your own personal use is that, generally speaking, you can buy a 6-link that is good enough from the market very, very cheaply. There are a lot of divination cards like the Sacrifice, which gives you an item level 100 sacrificial garb, that will give you a 6-link for early personal use, and that you can get very cheap and that are then easy to chrome. It's not something that you absolutely can never 6-link an item, and if your build revolves around a specific unique, it may, and say for instance my current character here, the best in slot unique for them in the chest is the Tinkerskin Sadist Garb unique. In that case, then buying it 6-linked is one option, but buying it without 6 links and then manually 6-linking it is also an option too. But if you're using a rare chest, only 6-link it if the 6-link version with your current stats will sell well. By all means, 5-link an item for personal use, and just see this as a bit of a cost of improving your character. Use a prophecy if you want. If you elect to fuse it though, 20 quality at first and 6 socket at first. This gives you a slim chance of actually hitting a 6-link, because you might hit a 6-link before you hit a 5-link. And it also increases the chance of getting your item to 6 socket and then to 5-link. The statistically significant tests on 20 quality items imply that the chance to 6-link is 1 in 1,000. The chance to get the first 5 gem links connected to each other, but the 6th one not connected, is 10 in 1,000, or 1%. And the chance to get the second 5 links done. So that means the first gem slot is disconnected, but then the second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth are all connected, is 3 in 1,000. So this means that when you've got a 5 socket item, you have a 1 in 100 chance of 5 linking it. But when you have a 6 socket item, you have a 14 in 1,000 chance. So 40% more of a chance compared to the 5 socket item of getting at least 5 links, that are at least 5 connected sockets. So for that reason, always 20 quality and 6 socket your items before attempting to even 5 link them. Do not lightly roll over a 5 link early in a league. If you're using a unique item, and that unique item is reasonably cheap, like the Tinkerskin Sadist Garb, which I think typically goes for 20 chaos early in a league, it's usually best to sell the 5 link version and buy a brand new not linked one and start again. Finally, you can sometimes find opportunities to craft consumable items like maps. In the Betrayal League, there was a bug for a period where the Vaal Temple map could only be acquired by Vaaling a tier 15 tower map, and that wasn't the intended result. It should have been available from Vaaling any tier 15. This meant that for a whole period I was able to fund all of my maps for free by buying towers off people and Vaaling all of them after chiseling and elking them, Vaaling all of them, and then just selling the ones that went into Vaal temples, which is a 1 in 16 chance. At the time, those were selling consistently for 80 to 85 chaos, and that would basically give me 5 chaos back for each map that I Vaaled. This essentially funded funded half of my tower purchases early in the league. I was purchasing these maps, Vaaling them, and selling the 8 mod ones at a premium, selling the Vaal temples at a premium, and then running all the ones that didn't become explosively good. You'll have to look into those sorts of opportunities yourself, because they do vary from league to league. So that's things that you're crafting for yourself. If we're talking about crafting for profit though, your first 2 rules, you've got to remember that you're crafting for other people. So it's not necessarily what you think is good, but it's what the economy, what the game community as a whole thinks is good. You want to create items where demand outstrips supply, and where the cost to create is considerably less than the market will bear. You're mostly not going to be creating what I'd term a forever item, like an item that's so good that the player does not feel any real compulsion to ever upgrade from it. Instead, you're mostly going to be crafting items that are tremendous upgrades for people, and you do not want to be crafting items that the market cannot yet afford to buy. So if it stays 3 to 14 of a new league, you don't want to be crafting mirror tier items. Maybe you'll get one. I mean, if you do, that's miraculous, fantastic. Be ecstatic with that. But if you craft an item that's worth 500 exalted orbs, but it's early in a league, there's only going to be 3 or 4 people with the resources to pay that, and they're going to be the shrewdest traders out there. So if we look at a very solid item, and in this case I'm going to take my helmet. Well, my helmet's not actually particularly solid. It's actually pretty damn mediocre, but it is an example that I want to make here. You'll notice that it is a fairly premium base. It's an item level 86 Elder helmet. The very first step of any good rare item is the drop of the base. 86 Elder and 86 Shaper items are the best bases available, and more specifically, the best of these is the Energy Shield ones in the current metagame. So that's the Hubris Circlet, the Vaal Regalia, the Sorcerer Boots, and I can't remember what the gloves are, but they're the least important of them. That's the first step that's needed. You need to find this drop. With the case of this Regicide Mask that you see here, I believe I picked this up off another player. So they'd killed Uber Elder, and then I just bought the helmet, which was probably unidentified at the time I bought it. Didn't have the enchant on it. I then just kept throwing enchants at it until I got something good. So one of the next steps, the absolute first step of a great item is the drop. Then there's several other steps. There's a potential for it to be enchanted, for it to be rolled, for it to be divined, and for it to be overqualityed. So you'll see that the helmet that I was looking at there was 23% quality, which actually isn't very important on this helmet, but on some items it is very important. It's enchanted with 40% increased arc damage, which is not the best enchant for arc, but it is the second best. It's also been rolled to have life and resist, and then you have the option of divining it, which isn't worth doing on this item. You can do these in any order, but the cost of the item varies tremendously with the order that they're done in. Generally speaking, it is best to sort the enchant out first, especially with helmets. Helmets, you want to get a good enchant on them early, and then let that guide you as to how to craft the rest of the item. So you'll get the base, then you'll enchant it, then you'll seek to roll it, and maybe overquality it if justified, roll it, and then divine it. Once you've done the hardest part of creating an item, so in this case that is getting the arc enchant, which, as I say again, it's the second best enchant for arc. It's not something staggering. This is not a magnificent item. You then want to do at least a quick job on all of the rest. One thing I've done that's been very lucrative this league has been hitting a powerful enchant that's minion related, and then getting the +3, and then rolling the +3 to socketed minion gems and overqualitying the item. And so yeah, don't bother divining them, but just do cheap additions that make the item something that is excellent for someone to use in the medium term. Ideally, you want to start crafts with methods that have many good outcomes. And that's why my personal favourite approach, and it's one that was very lucrative early in Betrayal, but I think a lot more people have started doing it, is to pick up item level 86 Shaper and Elder Helms, throw an enchant on them either via the lab or an enchanted fossil, and then let that guide you as to where to go from there. But there's other options as well. You can start with level 86, item level 86 boots, and hit them with shuddering fossils, which can give you both 35% move speed and also an additional 4 to 6% conditional move speed. And that can be used in addition with pristine fossils if you want, for life bonus. You can craft abyssuals. You can craft any item slot with prismatic fossils to hit resists and potentially weapon elemental damage. You can craft level 86 Stygian belts. You can craft steel and opal rings, and you can craft Shaper cooldown reduction belts using shuddering fossils to make the Shaper cooldown reduction mod more frequent. All of these options are good to keep in mind, because all of them can create very many different possible items that are all good, but good to different characters. You want to follow the metagame, so if physical weapons are amazingly powerful, if the perception across the player base is that they're bad, don't craft them. Maybe craft one to use yourself, but don't craft them for profit. When you're not playing, at least consider watching popular streamers, and you don't want to take this to the point of obsession. As a good example of this, in the Harbinger League, the best wands were physical damage wands for attacks. However, the popular perception was that elemental wands were better, and this is influenced by the fact that the Piscator's Vigil unique wand was very easy to get and was much more effective than any equivalent cost physical damage wand. And this meant that throughout that entire league, even though physical wands were the best you could get, people were there was much more demand for elemental wands. People would want something to use till they got their Piscators, then they'd get their Piscators, and then eventually they would be so invested in the elemental wand playstyle that they would want to stick with elemental wands even after they'd outgrown Piscators and they wanted to get something that was an endgame forever wand. Corollary to this is don't craft for hipster builds for profit. And sorry to people that are playing unusual builds, you know, your cast on critical strike, Rain of Arrows build that is using, as a spell payload, is using something ridiculous, Fireball. That's a really, really unusual combination. People that are familiar with how things scale will see that that's going to be an unpopular combination. Now, that build would have very specific demands on items that it would want, and it would want attack speed, it would want crit chance, and it would want increases to levels of fire spells, increased fire damage. But there's just not nearly enough demand for unusual niche items like that. Instead, craft for things that are the popular builds. And also, don't craft for builds in the first 2 weeks of a league. Don't craft for builds that are regarded as really difficult to play in the early league, like cast on crit builds. Also remember that lower quality crafts are harder to sell later in the league than they are early. Early on, demand dominates, mid-league there's a balance, and late league supply dominates. And so that means that unless your item is one of the very best ones on the server, you're not going to be able to sell it easily in the late league. There's a whole lot to say about selling your crafted items, but my general rule of thumb is if an item is mirror quality, it should not be sold for less than 200 exalts, but the vast majority of players will never encounter an item of that quality. An item that feels like a forever item for someone, so one that you think someone's going to use, they're never going to upgrade from it, you want to try and get 10 exalts for that, if it's not close to mirror quality. 3 exalts for a stepping stone item that is going to feel like it is amazing in tier 16 maps, and that for lots of people they'll never upgrade from. 1 exalt if you're not sure. 0.3 of an exalt for an item that is way too good to roll over, but that feels like it's something that you could use in tier 16 maps, but that you would want to improve quickly. And 5 to 10 chaos for items that are just good enough for red maps, but that don't feel amazing. Anyway, that's all I've got to say on profit from crafting. The last point that I want to make is running bosses. This is your 4th option for making currency in the days 3 to 14 phase of a league. A number of bosses in the game have ultra high drop rates on specific items. You have the Shaper, you have the Uber Elder, you have the Elder, you have the various Elder Guardians, and you have Atzari and you have Izaro. Now, because these drop rates are so high, the demand for these items plummets very quickly. So for instance, the Atzari Flask, and I'm still using a rubbish tier 1 of these for some reason, but it's the 2nd best flask in the game, I believe. However, it has a 50% drop rate from a very easy to access boss. And so that means that by day 5 of a new league, it's worth pennies unless at least one of the rolls is perfect, and by day 14 both rolls need to be perfect or one off it, otherwise the item just will not sell. Now that's an extreme example, a 50% drop rate. You have, but even items like Starforge and Voidforge that drop from much harder bosses than Atzari and that have much lower drop rates still end up being very cheap very quickly. Other players, so if you can get to bosses very fast, it can be lucrative to kill them. But also, other players will want bosses killed for Zana chain progression, for their Atlas, and for challenges and the like. If you know what you can do, you can actually sell your ability to kill these bosses. And so, you can advertise in Trade Channel 820, which is where where basically services get traded a lot in that channel. And just advertise there that you're someone that is capable of, say, killing Val Temple bosses with any mods, or maybe you're capable of killing the Shaper for people. I suggest you always act with integrity, but that you do charge as much as the market will bear. So you want to not rip people off by being dishonest, but you want to charge a high amount. Typically, 30 chaos is a pretty good price for killing a boss early in the league, and that'll fall as more people start offering the service. Lastly, I always worked on the basis that if I fuck up, I will replace the costs to the person. So if I'm running if I say I'll run someone's Shaper for them, and I disconnect and blow a portal, and then I'm stupid and I die a couple of times, and I end up unable to finish, in that case, I will refund their set. Do that, and people will come back to you, and you'll get messages from people saying, hey, can you kill all? my loot, but I'll give you 50. I'll give you an exalt for it, or something like that. You will want to agree in advance on the loot. My arrangement is usually that boss-specific uniques go to the owner of the map. All other loot is as it falls, and that's actually a pretty good deal for the person running the service, because in a lot of cases, like the Shaper and Uber Elder, because a lot of the value of those is tied up in the item level 86 Shaper and Elder drops that come there. But you can have other agreements as well. You can say, for instance, a free service, all loot's yours except for Watcher's Eyes, and if one of those drops, it's mine. So a list of popular things you can run a boss service for. There's the hard mode of Red Elder, so that's when you save Shaper. There's the Shaper himself. There's the tier 16 corrupt rare Guardians, so people can build their Atlas bonus and get the Guardian maps on it. There's a Val Temple, and there's rescues, where someone underestimates a boss, has 2 portals left, and asks for help. I always suggest in a rescue that you negotiate how to handle failure before you go in there, and I will usually work on the basis I'll make a good faith attempt, but no promises. In any case, those are my tips for making currency early in a league, but after the first day. I'm going to leave it there. If you've got any questions, feel free to ask in the comments below.